and welcome to this strategic analysis video for the May 2019 strategic case study on private health provider Denby Healthcare. This is the penultimate video in the strategy pre-scene analysis video series, and in this video we're going to look at the various different models that you will have learned throughout your CIMA syllabus and how we can apply those to Denby Healthcare. So before we begin, just a very quick overview of the case that we are analysing. So it's Denby Healthcare, a large public organisation based in Keeland, and by public I mean it trades openly on the stock market, but it actually provides private healthcare for citizens within Keeland and also from overseas. And it's probably something that's quite familiar to us. We've maybe used private healthcare before, we maybe be aware of private healthcare, but perhaps don't really know the logistics behind the industry. And so it makes a very interesting case for us to analyse. And how we are going to ultimately analyse it is through the use of the rational model. So looking at where the organisation is, where we are at Denby Healthcare as a member of the senior management team at Denby Healthcare, analyse where we currently are, where we ultimately want to be through use of stakeholders and critical success factors and governance and ethics, etc. And finally, how we are going to get there. We know where we are, we know we want to be, how are we actually going to get there? I'm going to start by looking at where we want to be. What ultimately do we want to achieve at Denby? Where are we heading? Where is our final destination? And we're going to start this future situation by looking at the strategy and the values and mission of Denby Healthcare. And as I'm sure you're aware by now, a mission statement is what the organisation is all about. Why does the organisation exist? Who does it exist for? What is it trying to achieve? And a good mission statement should answer these questions. And the best model to analyse mission statements is that of Campbell, which analyses the purpose, strategy, values and policies of an organisation. And the mission statement that we were given in the pre-scene was that we strive to attract and retain the most committed and skilled employees, each of whom has a passion for creating an excellent clinical environment and for delivering the best available clinical care. So, based on that, let's analyse it in the context of Campbell's model. So, first of all, purpose. Why does the organisation exist? Who does it exist for? What are we trying to achieve? Well, actually, in the pre-scene, the vision statement arguably analysed and fulfilled this question here about what does the organisation hope to achieve long-term. And the vision statement was, we wish to be recognised internationally as a world-leading healthcare provider. Which is all well and good, but the actual mission statement didn't really explain this. It didn't put the patients at the forefront of it. It spoke about being committed to retaining the best possible employees who had the passion to create the best possible care. It didn't actually mention who that care was for. And I think that's potentially a failing in the organisation's mission statement, particularly when a mission statement is supposed to be something that creates goal congruence and allows all employees to work towards something. It's very unusual to have a mission statement that's all about retaining your employees. An organisation doesn't necessarily exist to be a place of employment for employees. Although one could argue that by saying it's all about offering the best possible care, it is implied that that care is for patients and therefore it's mentioned. But just perhaps tweaking it a little just to have something along the lines of we aim to provide our patients with the best possible clinical care, just to tag on to the end of that, to reword that final sentence about providing the best available clinical care could be perhaps beneficial, because it would put the patients at the forefront, the focus of the mission statement, which ultimately is what the organisation is trying to achieve. If their vision statement of being a world-leading healthcare provider It's all well and good having the best possible employees. It's all well and good having the best care available. But if you're not in a position where you are providing it to the patients, then it is quite moot. However, the strategy is far more referenced in the mission statement. How will the organization compete? The range of businesses it is operating in. We know that they compete by being the best. They want to be the best. They're not being the most readily available. They're not being the cheapest, the most financially accessible. It's about being the best, providing the best possible care, having the best possible employees, working in the best possible conditions, in the best possible environment to create the best possible care. So it's very much, if you think of the Porter generic strategies, we're competing on a diversified level, on a differential level. We're being different from everyone else. We're not being the cheapest. We're not just trying to provide the same care as everyone else at a cheaper level. We're not competing in that way. We're competing by being different, by providing something else. That also leads quite nicely on to our values here, about what the organization stands for. We know what we stand for. Above everything, we stand for quality, giving the best possible care. And in turn, innovation can come into that. Research, development, working on better ways to provide even better care. So strategy and values are definitely fulfilled perhaps by the Denby mission statement. Purpose is the one that is perhaps a little bit ambiguous at the moment. Finally, we have policies, which are what individuals within the organization, how they're expected to act to provide the defined value, strategy and purpose of the organization. And that was also referenced in the pre-scene. If we look at those values, we're looking about providing a basis for employees, for staff within Denby to deliver the best possible care, to focus on patient needs, to maintain a high standard of professionalism, which were the values of the organization, explicit values given to us in the pre-scene. But perhaps they are not as referenced in the purpose, strategy and values of the mission statement as they could have been. There was no mention of patients in the actual mission statement, yet the three main values all ultimately focused on patients. So potentially there could be scope there for rebranding the mission statement of the organization to put patients at the forefront. But once we know ultimately what the mission of the organization is, what it is trying to achieve, we have to look at ways in which we can measure how much progress we are making. For that reason, we're going to move on now to the balanced scorecard. Now, the balanced scorecard is a very useful approach to performance measurement, and it would be very appropriate for Denby to use, given what they want to achieve, although there's no evidence at the moment that they are using it. And the reason why the balanced scorecard is great is because it separates the organization into 4 different perspectives, all of which are useful for assessing the growth and development of the organization, and for different reasons and different factors. So, for example, we've got the financial perspective. We're a public company, we trade on the stock market, we have shareholders, we need to be profitable, we need to provide them a return on their investments. We know that we pay dividends. Arguably, you could say that we're paying too much in dividends. We're paying nearly 60%. It's currently at 57.5% of our profit was paid out in dividends. Now, is that an appropriate? Should we be reinvesting in the business? And also, it's useful to measure the cash flow and the gearing. So we're looking more at our liquidity and our solvency ratios here, which were positive in the pre-scene. It had more assets than it had liabilities. It had a good interest cover for its finance costs. So financially, it is in a good place. And often the financial perspective is quite the foundation of the business. It's a business's job to ultimately be profitable, to be economically sustainable. So before we look at all these other perspectives, it's very important to get the financial sustainability and stability of the organization well. or locked down, so to speak. And then we have the internal perspective, and this is very important for, it's tied often with the learning perspective, which is often called the innovation perspective and the growth perspective. And this is particularly important for an organization like Denby because staff are so critical. It was repeated many, many times in the pre-scene how important staff were, how important retaining staff were. In fact, remember back to the previous page, we were actually discussing about how they valued staff so much they even made their mission statement about keeping staff and retaining staff and hiring staff. So making sure that employees are utilized, making sure that they are satisfied, making sure that they are doing their job effectively or they have the means to do their job effectively are really good ways of assessing how well they are utilizing their internal resources. And by utilizing your internal resources effectively, you are going to naturally care for your employees more. Your employees are going to feel valued, they are going to feel like they are contributing. And on the subject of learning, though, we need to think about the various different innovations that we are trying to create here at Denby, the new treatments that we're trying to make the best possible care available, remember, was our statement, and therefore we need to always be looking at ways to provide even better care. We could also look at the number of new treatments we have available as a way of looking at how we're expanding. Or we currently offer surgeries for 100 different ailments. So let's try and get up to 150 ailments within the next few years. So therefore there'll be more potential customers that we have available, etc. Now finally, we have the customer perspective. Again, this would be more in the context of Denby, would be more the patients. It could be the insurance companies as well. And also the KHS, which remember is a huge proportion of our business referrals from the Keyland National Health Service. So looking at the number of customers that we have available and also the number of repeat customers is very important. If in 2017 the KHS referred 1,000 patients to us for hip replacement therapy, then in 2018 they only referred 500 patients for hip replacements. Why was that? Were we too expensive? Did they have their own resources available? Were there simply just less people who needed hip replacements in that particular year? But only by quantifying it, only by finding the actual figures out, by analysing it through using methods like the performance measurement scorecard, can we actually then take action. We can then see why, or see that there has been a difference, and then we can investigate why there has been a difference, and then we can make changes which would benefit the business. And also patient satisfaction is very important. We score quite highly at the moment, so patient surveys are conducted. It's very important that the care is of a top level, because the GP of a patient, whether they have used our services regularly or not, will be able to tell whether or not they have received good treatment. And the treatment will need to be at least as good as the KHS, because there's no benefit if they receive worse care. Why would they pay more to receive worse care? And we appreciate that the patient often cannot tell whether they have received good care or not, because they are not medically trained personnel. They don't know whether this was the best possible care they could have received or not. They don't know how they are supposed to feel after the operation, etc. They may think that, I was in so much pain after the operation, and then I had an infection, and then I had this and that and the other. They could have just been unfortunate, and that could have just been the case of that's just a risk of that particular surgery that they had, and they'd have been even higher risk of infection, even higher risk of pain and a slow recovery at a KHS hospital. But all they see is they paid a lot for this surgery. They thought that because they were paying private it would be a breeze, but it turns out it was still a lot of effort and it was still a lot of pain. That's just a simple fact of operations for a lot of things. They perhaps don't know whether they've received good care or not, but they can tell whether they have had good service in terms of, was the room nice? Was the food nice? Were the staff friendly? Was there a good doctor or nurse to patient ratio, etc. These are the sort of things we can really separate ourselves from the KHS from. And it's also important because, remember, we also have Poster and Bronte, who are two major competitors who operate in very much the same way, using the very same business model as we do here at Denby. So it's a very good way of separating ourselves more from the other private hospitals than from the KHS. So the next section relates to governance. I'll briefly give you an overview of the theory of governance before going on to the specific parts related to the case. So essentially, governance is the way in which organizations are directed, administered, and controlled, with the aim of ensuring that the organization is run in a way that is right for all stakeholders. So essentially, ensuring that a business is run to benefit the stakeholders and society as a whole. So, sounds very good. And it's worth noting that this is only applicable to UK companies and listed companies at that, companies that trade on the stock exchange. But that's not to say that there aren't things that we can take from this and apply to any organization. It doesn't matter where that organization is based. Just as in our case, it's not based in the UK. And it doesn't even matter if the company isn't listed, because of course it's all about running the business in the best possible way. So just because you don't have to do it doesn't mean that you couldn't gain from it. Let's take a look at some of the few key factors from the Code of Governance. What is considered good governance? And that's having a separate chairman and CEO. Of course, the CEO is head of the organization, and the board is ahead of the CEO. And so the CEO runs the organization on behalf of the board, and then the chairman is the head of the board. So if you had a situation where the same person was the chairman and the CEO, they might be setting themselves targets they know they'll be able to achieve. So they're not pushing the company, trying to get the most out of the company, trying to achieve its potential. The chairman is just setting themselves easy targets that they know they'll be able to achieve so they can get their bonuses. Independent non-executive directors. These are people who are not employed by the organization. They sit on the board to, in a sense, act as the control for the executive directors, to ensure that the executive directors are running the organization in a way that is beneficial for stakeholders and not for themselves. This, of course, it goes some way to removing the issues caused with the agency problem. Now, agency problem is essentially where directors are running the organization on behalf of the shareholders. Now, the shareholders own the company, the directors don't, but the directors are in charge of the company. So the directors perhaps aren't necessarily interested in the long-term viability of the organization. They perhaps are more interested in their short-term gains. So they may leverage long-term sustainability, long-term growth for short successes, small successes, so that they can boost the share price of the organization, so that they can boost the dividends paid out to the shareholders and get their bonuses and move on. And so that's the point of the non-executive directors. Non-executive directors also need to be people who are skilled, knowledgeable, not just any old person. They need to know whether what the executive directors are doing is right or wrong, and they have to be firm as well. There's a tendency for independent NEDs to not rock the boat because they're paid quite a handsome stipend for doing it. It's only a few days a year job, and so a lot of them don't bother doing it, or don't bother sort of standing up, rocking the boat, where of course they have to. That is their job. And one of the main jobs for the NEDs is to sit on the Audit, Nomination and Remuneration Committees. Now, these are 3 different committees that, in a sense, are the essence of what governance is, ensuring that everything is done fairly and ethically. That's the Audit Committee, ensuring that executive directors are not using company funds to fund business trips and golf trips, that the shareholders wouldn't approve of. For example, if an executive director is taking a client to Dubai for 2 weeks to discuss a business opportunity on the company's dime in a 5-star hotel, well, it could have just been a couple of hours meeting at the company's office. That would have been enough. Yet they chose to go on holiday for 2 weeks in a 5-star hotel. That's not an effective, efficient, correct use of company money, and that's the kind of thing that the audit committee is responsible for stopping. The nomination committee are in charge of selecting people to sit on the board, selecting the executive directors. And this is to ensure that the chairman or the CEO doesn't simply bring their son or their daughter or their husband or their wife on board to the company to earn extra money for the family, to give them an opportunity. No, it needs to be someone who is right for the job, someone who is experienced, someone who has knowledge in the industry, and generally someone who is not related to other members of the board, because this of course affects their independence, this affects their ability to think, and perhaps increase the chance of them being biased. And remuneration committees as well. This is the committee responsible for deciding the pay on the directors. And this is because directors' pay and this of directors has to be disclosed to the public, and so of course it's important to come out with a fair level of payment. If the company that you work for is not doing so well, it made X million in losses and it's got to lay off employees, but then it's also found out that the director had a £40 million bonus this year, which was a 20% increase on last year's, then people are going to think, well, why? Why is that director getting a bonus, a raise, when the company has done worse this year than it did last year? The company didn't meet any of its targets. It was supposed to be trying to break even this year, and it made millions in losses, yet you've given the director a bigger bonus than you even did last year. That's the kind of thing that will really frustrate the public, turn the public against the organisation, turn the shareholders against the organisation, turn the other stakeholders, such as the employees, against the organisation. And that is what governance tries to overcome. It's also worth pointing out that governance has a risk management focus, particularly with regards to the audit committee. So the audit committee is often in charge of creating things like risk registers and other things like that ensure that risks are being dealt with. Because it's one thing to identify risks, it's another to actively go about mitigating the impact of those risks. And that's one of the values of corporate governance. Financial reporting and control, also very important, ensuring that all the statements are done as per the laws of the particular country in which the organisation operates in. Ensuring that directors have all the information they need, because of course they can't really be judged on their decision making if they aren't given the amount of information given. So this system is to ensure that all executive directors are provided with all the information that they need to facilitate good decision making. And with regards to decision making, that all directors are involved in it. And this means even if it means taking, something as simple as a show of hands, just ensuring that everyone is involved. Often, in certain situations, if you've got, say, founders of the company still sitting on the board, the founders are very powerful. Everyone agrees with what the founder says. And that's against governance. The whole point of a board is that there is a consensus amongst a group of people rather than one person making all the decisions. So if that isn't happening, if one person or two people or half the board are far too powerful, then that goes against the point of a board and thus against the point of good corporate governance. And regular meetings with both institutional shareholders and all shareholders at the annual general meeting. Institutional shareholders, of course, being things like your pension schemes and big stakeholders, big shareholders like that. And it's important that we do this because of the fact that they have a lot of money invested within the organisation. If they were to take their money out of the organisation, it could cause a lot of problems with the market because the share price might drop, as people may be thinking that there's something wrong with the organisation or it's on the decline because this major institutional shareholder has decided to take their money out of it. So now that we have discussed the theory of governance, it's time to apply it specifically to Denby. And there are a few issues here, some good, some bad, when we compare them to the theory behind governance. We know that there is a Keelan Code of Governance mentioned specifically in the treaty, and we are a public company, and therefore it's likely that we will be expected to comply. And now there is the potential for the agency problem here because a lot of the members of the board are not owners of the organisation. The founders retired a long time ago, so there is the potential that they will be running it for their own interest, which of course can be controlled by terms of remuneration in shares rather than in pure cash. Because if you reward a director in shares, then there is an incentive for them to improve the sustainability of the company, to improve the overall share price of the organization. There is potential for conflict of interest as well, not necessarily in an underhanded way, just purely the fact that several of the directors still sit on various different boards of other organisations, charities, etc. John Jenkins, the Chief Executive Officer, is a board member at a charity that provides medical care. So if there's any dealings between the two organisations, everything has to be above board. You've also got Kevin Mack, who's one of the directors, the independent directors of the organisation, who's actually on the management committee of the Keelan Nursing Council. Of course, we employ lots of nurses. So there's always the risk for some sort of story getting out of, oh, he was on the management committee of the Keelan Nursing Council and then there were 6 nurses involved in some sort of scandal. 2 were KHS ones, 1 worked at Postar, 1 worked at Bronte, 2 worked at Denby, and they all were accused of the same thing, but all of the nurses minus the 2 that worked in Denby got punished, and the 2 that were working for Denby didn't get punished. Suddenly it's a kind of a media story of abusing position. So it's very important that we make sure that nothing like that happens, because that could be disastrous from a PR perspective. Big issue here is that the chair is not independent. The chairperson is supposed to be a non-executive director. They are supposed to be completely independent, but the chair here at Denby, Professor Maurice Lavelle, is not independent. They have a long prior association with the organisation. So that's probably one of the big governance issues, the negative governance issues here, is that the chair is not independent. Arguably, or potentially the biggest one, though, is that there is no mention of the Remuneration Nomination Audit Committee. And these are really important because this is how the board is kept checked. By having a remuneration committee staffed by non-executive directors, we ensure that the directors are paid a fair amount and not paid what they decide that they should be paid. By having the nomination committee, we make sure the right people are appointed to the board, and the audit committee is responsible for reviewing risk and installing a culture of risk management throughout the entire organisation. So very important, and no mention of them whatsoever, and they must be staffed by non-executive directors. And they could do that because they actually do have a very good balanced number of non-executive directors. In the Code of Governance, you should have half and half, and they actually do have that here at Denby. There's also no mention of the annual general meeting, which, as we discussed in the theory slide about governance, is very important. It's very important that all shareholders, no matter what their shareholding, get a say or are informed about what is going on at the organization. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to finish by just telling you a few things about the products that we produce here at Astranti and the ones that are part of our course. So these materials can all be purchased as part of the course or purchased individually. So we have our study text. We have 3 study texts for all the objective test exams. So 3 study texts for E1, P1, F2, F3, etc. But we also have the study text specifically for the case study exams, split into 2 parts. The first is about how to approach the exam, how to analyze the information, how to plan your answers, how to write your answers, and also the second part, which looks at the key theories from the objective test levels that are relevant to the particular case study. So if you are looking at P2, F2, E2 for the management exam, F3, P3, E3 for the strategic case study exam, and so on. We have our course videos, which look at how to plan your answers, how to manage your time effectively. These are the key reasons why people fail the exam. We have our pre-scene analysis, which looks at the pre-scene in a lot of depth, applies key information to that, and also concludes with the strategic analysis, where we look at the various different models in the CIMA syllabus and apply them to the case, and also the top 10 most likely issues to arise in your exam. Generally, we have a 70 to 80% accuracy rate on our top 10 issues. Our industry pack, which details in great depth the history and the current contemporary issues within the particular industry that the pre-scene is based on. We also have 20 to 25 industry examples that you can use within your answers. We have mock exams that can be purchased with or without marking and feedback, where you can get some real exam practice in, look for the kinds of things that the examiner is going to bring up in the exam, and also get marking and feedback from expert markers who have marked for CIMA and for us for many years, who know exactly the kind of things that the examiner is looking for, exactly the kinds of mistakes that students often make, and can provide lots of detailed feedback to ensure that you improve on your performance. We also have our master classes, which are 2 day-long classes which look at all the key issues facing students in the exam. We will also go through live planning, showing you how to plan your answers effectively, how to write your answers effectively. Again, key things that cause people to fail the strategic case study exam, or any of the case study exams for that matter. And also, if you do sign up for our course, provided that you have filled out your forms, provided that you have submitted your mocks, provided you have done everything to show that you have really given it your all to try and pass this exam, we also offer a pass guarantee, giving a free resit to anyone who fails the exam.